Recording in progress.
And we will start the meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance led by Scott.
United States of America, and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, and justice for all.
Okay. Hello, everybody. As everybody knows, this meeting is for the purpose to continue our discussion about the road improvements to Boston Road, which we started last week. And after hearing and considering comments that we received from the residents and the audience, we asked our town engineer and our chief of police and our director of DPW and our consultant from TEC, along with Jody, to take those comments and go back and work on some proposals that might address the concerns we heard about speeding along the road. So with that introduction, I think Steve Cronin, I'm going to turn it over to you to update both the board as well as the audience who is here tonight in terms of what you have looked at and what you are proposing and perhaps some changes to be made.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. So as you mentioned at the meeting on September 28th, we heard from a number of concerned residents who felt that the 75% design that was presented did not do enough to address the speed and traffic problems that they've been experiencing on Boston Road. So since that meeting, the DPW, along with public safety and our design engineers, revisited all the traffic calming methods that are available to us in the Federal Highway Administration's toolbox of individual traffic calming measures. We had some lengthy dialogue with public safety about some of their concerns with the 75% design, the various types of traffic calming measures that are available, and what they've implemented here in town that they've found to be successful in controlling speeds. In addition to that, we asked our design engineer to evaluate some of the suggestions that were given by the residents of Boston Road to reduce speeds, to see if they could be incorporated into the project, whether or not those conflicted with Mass DOT's design requirements, and if they could be designed in a time frame that fits within the confines of the current design schedule deadline of October 14th. And then finally, we met with our Mass DOT project manager to review that list of options and discuss the 75% design submission deadline of October 14th. Through that process, we created a list of design options that we feel, if incorporated in the previously presented 75% design, would help to effectively control speeds on Boston Road while providing some additional traffic calming benefits. So one of the first options that we looked at that was in the Highway Administration's toolbox was to incorporate strategically located flush median islands along the Boston Road corridor. Originally we had a conceptual design that showed four locations for these islands that we're considering. You know, we'd have to look at, where these islands are, in context with driveways and things like that in the actual design, but, something that could be considered. The benefits are that they influence speed reduction because they create a visually narrowing effect of the road. The additional line striping along with the change in texture gives the impression that the travel lanes are significantly narrower, and that in turn forces people to be more aware and to slow down their speed. So we have a couple of options for flush mounted. We could either do textured pavement or basically, painted median islands. We've looked at a number of locations, Crown Road being one of them, which you see here in the rendering, as an option. So we feel that, that helps address some of public safety concerns regarding access and traveling up and down Boston Road during, times of high traffic. But it also, provides a speed benefit that we need. So in addition to that, we heard a lot of comments from residents and suggestions that they had that we looked at incorporating as well. We talked to TEC about those. We looked at whether or not they were options legally and whether or not they would fit Mass DOT requirements. We talked about it with Mass DOT, but a couple of those were radar speed feedback signs, painted bike lanes, and then a thickly settled designation along Boston Road, along with some posted speed limits and strictly enforced speed limit signs. So, we've used radar speed feedback signs in numerous places in town. They cannot be used to basically enforce the speed limit, but they do provide a benefit. It reinforces speed reduction. It allows for the collection of speed data so we can see if they're actually working and where, if we need to maybe place them in different areas. They aid obviously in speed enforcement. And they do provide, it's a proven traffic calming effect. We've seen it work. So we feel that, it's something that we could easily incorporate into the project. We discussed it with Mass DOT, our project engineer, and they were on board with the recommendation. So we think that's something that we could incorporate in the current design, which would not result in a significant design change. In addition to that, one of the things that could be considered, may not be the most popular, is some painted bike lanes, basically a solid green colored pavement with white cycling stencils. So one of the benefits of this is that it creates a visual separation between the travel lane and the sidewalk and the side of the road. Also gives the road a narrowing effect, which helps to reduce speed. And it increases driver awareness of cyclists. If they know that that particular lane is designated for cyclists, they'll be unlikely to travel into that lane. So, and one other option that was brought up by residents that we discussed with our designer and with Mass DOT, we also looked into, Mass General Law and the ability to do this, was a thickly settled designation along Boston Road. So Boston Road just barely qualifies for thickly settled designation, but because of the, the space between driveways and the number of houses along the corridor, it does qualify. So it's something that could be considered. It would effectively set a statutory 30 mile per hour speed limit. The town does have options to further reduce that to 25 miles per hour. But under Mass General Law, that would require a town meeting vote. Now, the town could establish a town-wide 25 mile per hour speed limit, or they could do a street-by-street speed limit for thickly settled in business districts. Mass DOT doesn't recommend doing that, only because it creates confusion among some of the drivers. So it's their recommendation. If the town's going to consider that, they strongly suggest that you go with a town-wide 25 mile per hour speed limit. But along with that thickly settled designation, we'd obviously add some additional signage along the road, identifying it, some strictly enforced signs. Those signs would have to meet, DOT standards, so they'd be highly visible. And as I said, Boston Road does qualify, so it's something that could certainly be done. We talked about it with Mass DOT as well, and they think that we can incorporate that without a significant design change. So, so these options, we basically feel that we can incorporate them into the current 75% design. It would result in some additional work for our design engineers. We discussed that with both them and with Mass DOT. Obviously, the October 14th deadline is rapidly approaching. So we really begged and pleaded with Mass DOT, and we were able to get a 2-week extension on that deadline to October 28th. It is aggressive, and it's going to take quite a bit of work for our design engineers, but they felt, there was a possibility of incorporating these things into the design, getting it submitted in time. So, so those basically are the list of options that we have to incorporate into the design that we presented last week. And certainly looking to hear any feedback or questions that the board and the public has.
Thanks, Steve. I want to go to the chief now and hear his suggestions and comments about what can be done by public safety to both enforce speed limits and to slow the speeds down on Boston Road.
Thank you, Andrea. So we have had extensive conversations with Steve Cronin and obviously Paul Starrett, the town engineer, in discussing what is and is not possible down on Boston Road. And we did provide those recommendations. We also feel strongly that the recommendations that Steve has summarized will have an impact on the speed of traffic, such as the flush textured median strips, the speed feedback signs, the increased signage for the strictly enforced, and as well as taking advantage of road striping and road diet opportunities throughout the project. That Boston Road is enforced as a statutory 30-mile-an-hour zone. And I know in the last meeting that there was discussion about doubling or tripling fines, which unfortunately it's not allowed through the state. Mass RMV would not allow us to just change the fine schedule based upon a road by road. It's extremely strongly discouraged to do that. The only time that you can double a fine is in a highly visible and well advertised active construction zone. So the fine schedule is the fine schedule. So it's based off of the statutory 30-mile-an-hour limit because of the thickly settled designation. So one of the things that we have done, obviously, since some of the feedback that we got last week was we tried to get the speed boards out. We had them out this week. We do have quite a bit of data that we've gathered over the past several years because of complaints that we've received for speeding down there, and it has remained consistent. The average speed is about 36 miles an hour, around the 50th percentile. And the average speed up by the Western Museum by number 4 Boston Road does decrease. We do have over 200,000 vehicles that we've measured over the past couple of years. So it does show that the speed boards do work because it keeps it at those speeds that are recorded are at a manageable level. So we do encourage the engineers to push on that a little bit with Mass DOT, and hopefully we can get a little bit of buy-in with that as well. On top of that, we're trying to step up our enforcement efforts as well, because if we can educate the operators prior to the project and get the overall speed dropped a little bit, it should, with the incorporation of the construction, kind of set the new limit, hopefully. And if this project when this project moves forward, you can anticipate the very strong police presence in the area. We want to make sure that these recommendations, determine if these recommendations are having an impact. And if not, hopefully we can target specific times where enforcement might produce better results.
Thank you. So I think at this point, I'm going to first start with the board. And if the board has questions or comments, entertain those questions or comments from the board first. And then I will go to questions or comments from the audience, but I'm going to make it very clear that your questions and comments are to be specific to what is being discussed tonight. We heard all of your comments about speeding and other concerns you had with this project last week. So I'm really going to hold everybody to questions and comments about what is specifically being presented tonight. So with that being said, let me go to the board and see if anybody has any comments, questions. John?
Yes, I noticed that one of the alternatives is that green painted strip for the bicycles. That's going to require a little bit of maintenance, but I'd certainly like the visual effect. And I think the physical changes with the islands and the striping and then the signage, I think that's a good start. And then if we get to a point where we think we need speed control a little bit more and want to go to 25 mile an hour, we can do that later. So I'm in favor of the changes and moving forward.
Anita and then Tom.
Yeah, I just want to thank Steve, Paul, Jonathan, and Chief Chambers for coming together and being really solution oriented, trying to come up with ideas for those concerns for the residents around speeding. I know it was a really hard week. I know you did a lot of work, and I just wanted to say thank you. I think it's a great plan. I support it as well. And although there might be pushback on the colored green paint on those bike lanes, I think that's also my preferred design.
Okay, Tom?
Yeah, I share in the appreciation of the good work done and left the conversation last week feeling like we wanted to see every reasonable approach taken to speed control. And I like that this combination of things have been considered. I like the fact that we can measure it and see how we're doing over time. We certainly don't want to make it any worse. And it sounds like the combination of measures and measurement and additional police presence is necessary will help us make sure that we're not making it any worse and ideally making it better than it is now.
Okay. All right, Scott? Yep.
Yeah, so first of all, I got thanks to everybody for getting the team together, and Jody, I think, probably writing her to make this thing actually happen. Yeah, pretty, I think, strong improvements from what we saw last. I guess my question is, I've never seen those green bike lanes. I've seen bike lanes with the sharrows. I've never seen the green ones. Is that, is there other towns that have done that? Is it really that bright?
Yeah, that is, Madam Chair, that is the design standard. It is more of an urban option. You see them, I've been on them in Cambridge and Boston, in other communities like that, but it is in a place where you specifically want to make motorists aware of the presence of cyclists. And that would be accomplished as well as the enhanced narrowing effect.
Scott, I can just add, I've seen them also in communities. And I will tell you that the green does fade over time, so that while it starts out bright, I can tell you over time it starts to fade a little bit. And, having driven through communities and on roads where that is, it definitely acts as a traffic calming effect and really does draw your eye and make you pay attention that there could be bicyclists around you, and you need to pay attention. So at least in my experience, it does work.
I guess I don't have I'm agnostic on the painting. I like the islands. I think that will help a lot. I like the the signage and so forth, but my feeling is let the abutters pick the color because they have to look at it every day.
True. Let me just echo my thanks for all the hard work that all of you have done over the last week. I know we pushed you hard, but we certainly appreciate the fact that you all came together and you've come up with these ideas and suggestions, which, like the rest of the board members, I support. Chief Chambers, the one thing I would say to you about enforcement, about probably 15 or 20 years ago, because I was on the planning board when I remember this, very often and frequently a patrol car sat at Drew Farms. And whether it was at night or during the day, and there was never any rhyme or reason to it, which obviously is a good thing. But I will tell you that back then, your presence made a significant difference. And when you talked to people of the residents of the town, it was always kind of said, the one road you don't speed on in Westford is Boston Road, because there's always a patrol car sitting there. So I throw that out to you to keep in mind that your presence works. And I think that if you were to start or mount or be able to have a patrol car out there on a more often basis, I suspect that within 4 to 6 weeks, we'd see the speeds come way down on Boston Road once it is known that you're out there and you're pulling cars over. So I simply throw that out for your consideration.
Well, I will take that under consideration. I will say that our patrol officers do a great job of trying to be very visible on the major commuter routes. Boston Road is a little difficult in that area, but we certainly can see where we can carve out some space.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, we do have some questions. And I see a couple of hands up, but I'm going to go to the questions that were folks have written in first, and then I'll go to the people who have their hands raised. So Peter Pazurski has two questions. And writes, for thickly settled, strictly enforced signage, do we expect the police would be pulling people over more often and strictly enforcing this area? That's his first question. So I think that's probably for you, Chief. And then his second question is, if 4-foot wide raised islands were ruled out due to wheelbase, why were 3-foot raised islands not considered? And I think that will probably be for one of the engineers who are on here. So why don't we start with the first question, Chief Chambers?
Yes, so the statutory speed limit is 30 miles an hour for thickly settled, and it's generally the default speed limit that gets enforced on country roads. So, and that's what we can get. When we write a citation, it's based off of that 30 mile an hour zone through our court system as well. Any appeals that go through a district court. So as far as strictly enforced goes, it gets judged off of kind of the travel speed of the roadway. So if we have most of the people traveling just over the speed limit and you have the anomaly, that's where you will stop the car. The idea that we can enforce a 32 mile an hour speed limit on a 30 mile an hour road, I don't think that's kind of the intent of it. But when you have those outliers of people that are pushing the pace or closing gaps, those are the vehicles that you look for. And although it wouldn't be well over 40, if you have somebody doing 38, 39 miles an hour on Boston Road and the majority of the traffic is doing 32, 33, those are the people, those are the vehicles that you're going to take a look at and enforce the speed limit with.
Okay, and then I'm not sure, Jonathan, Paul.
Yeah, I can take that one if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the 4-foot width for a raised median is the minimum recommended by design guidelines such as AASHTO and MassDOT. And really that's primarily for the placement of signs to allow for adequate offset to signs that are placed within the island, or else the island itself begins to become a hazard.
Okay. Patrick McGinn writes, I think we just answered this, Patrick. What is the statutory speed limit? Which I believe is 30 miles per hour. And is that different than what is currently posted at 30 miles per hour? And the answer is no. But Patrick has another question, which is, where would the other flush medians be placed? Interesting idea.
Yep. I can take that one as well. Sure. Yeah. So just based on preliminary evaluation of locations, considering things such as sight distance, the horizontal alignment, meaning the curvature of the roadway, the vertical alignment, the vertical grade, and other constraints such as available right-of-way, side slopes, trees, stone walls, things that we understand the abutters are sensitive to impacts to. We arrived at that initial valuation, arrived at 4 preliminary locations. 2 were up within the straightaway section, closer to Town Common in the vicinity of number 12 Boston Road and number 26 Boston Road. And then the other 2 are on the downhill portion preceding the horizontal curves. So really trying to slow down vehicles on that downhill section before they hit those curves. And those were in the vicinity of 36 Boston Road and 50 Boston Road. So the first one of those is just uphill of Crown Road. And then the other one is just prior to the last curve heading down the hill prior to approaching the fire station area.
We consider the location of driveways so it doesn't interfere with traffic operations, things like that.
Okay. And then we have two comments that I will just read that I don't believe require any response, but I will read them. Brian McDonald writes, signage just clutters the aesthetics of what should be a quaint New England road and are questionably effective. While I am more in favor of thin raised medians that do not require road width to be altered, as put forth by Patrick McGinn, flush medians at least have a hope of reducing speed. Maureen George wrote, signs are visual trash and don't work. And then Peter Pazurski wrote in, I would like Paul and the engineering team to weigh in. Do they feel people will be traveling faster or slower than today with the suggested changes? And a second follow-up, and do they really feel the flush medians will slow traffic? So Jonathan and Paul.
Sure, I can say, and I'm sure the chief will support me in this, and that's when an operator gets behind the wheel of a car, we have no idea what they're going to do. And it could be someone who just lost their job, that just had a partnership fight, and they're gonna go down to the nearest pub and get in their car and drive however the way they want, or they might be late to pick up their kid and finds out they've been waiting at a bus stop for 15 minutes and there's just a million factors that control what happens to an operator when they get behind the wheel of a car. So what we've introduced here with these items on Boston Road, they are designed to influence the vast majority of drivers to perform in a way that is safe for them and for other people. So I would say, yes, what we have proposed will have an effect, but most importantly, our feedback sign is going to give us constant data that we will be able to monitor and make adjustments if we find that we're not getting the performance that we need. But there are just too many factors to say exactly what people will do.
Jonathan, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that was pretty well said and summed up kind of the engineering and the reality of it is it really comes down to driver behavior as well. I think we're doing the best that we can within the confines of balancing the needs of the abutters with the desires to improve the roadway in the way that we know to meet the project need and goals.
Okay. I'm gonna, before I continue with some of the questions that are, have been written in, Bob Jeffries has his hand up.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
This is pretty much what I expected. And Andrea, you've limited me to only talking about what was presented. So I will limit it to the rumble strips. Can we get rid of the fake cobblestone and use real cobblestones? I'm even willing to pay for the real cobblestones since I actually have a surplus of them. That at least would do something to deter traffic. The fake ones with the imprints don't do much of anything. Ask anybody that's been hit in the crosswalk up at the parish church. The second thing is, what I see is that we got buckets of paint and we got some rumble strips. We didn't get anything else. The road isn't safer by this. I assume it's still a 40-mile-an-hour speed design. And enforcement, we know enforcement doesn't work. We talked about this over 20 years ago and nothing, it's gotten faster. It has not gotten slower. So enforcement isn't doing anything. But I would be curious, I'm wondering about what happened to, and were they even considered, two things. One was making a combined path. That seems to have, it's not in here, so I'm assuming it was rejected somehow. The second thing is the way the bikes now travel, and you can ask any kid in our neighborhood, If they want to get down Boston Road, they go down the Farm Road, which goes through our property. Farm Road goes all the way from Hildreth down to the bottom of Blake's Hill. And I offered that up and said, why don't we do that as the alternate for the bike lanes? And I don't see any, there wasn't any discussion. Was that even considered? Or is that somehow outside of the project? Because it seems to me the entire push here was, let's hold on to the money and let's not do anything that MassDOT won't support. And I guess my final comment is, did NEMCOG give money towards Main Street improvements where there aren't any sidewalks or bike lanes?
Okay, so let's start with Bob's questions. One was consideration given to combining pedestrians and bicycles in one lane. Who wants to answer that one?
So we did bring that back. We brought that to the select board, and I believe that was 2018, as one of the two alternatives. And the alternative that was selected by that board was the sidewalk in the bike lanes.
What? I don't know. Hang on, Bob, I see your hand, but let me get the questions that you asked answered first, and then we'll come back, okay? And I'm sure that your hand is being raised because you have a follow-up to the answer that was just given. Bob's second question was about the Farm Road that runs through his property and goes from Hildreth down to Blake's Hill, and whether or not this could be part of this project or not. And whether it was even considered. And I honestly don't know the answer to that question, or whether it was even discussed. And does anybody?
So Paul, do you want to address that? I mean, we did discuss it internally. Did not feel that it was an option that really fit the scope of the project or really provided any benefit to pedestrians.
Yeah,
pedestrians. It wasn't pedestrians.
So this path that goes out behind Mr. Jeffrey's property from Hildreth will connect down to the circle at the top of Blake's Hill Road. And this was brought up, has been brought up multiple times when we've talked about this. I believe, and Bob can clarify, that there are some entanglements with the ownership of the land and access and so forth. But it was apart from Boston Road, and it wasn't clear how we would make it accessible to someone that was in the town center wanting to get down to our commercial road at Littleton. But Bob knows more about the land rights and the properties. And
okay. And then, I'm sorry, Bob, your third question, which is of course now gone out of my mind. Can you repeat it?
Unfortunately, it went out of my mind too. So.
All right. Well, if you remember it, just let me know. Okay.
It was about NEMCOG and
whether they
contributed money to. And no, we had proposed Main Street as a Mass DOT tip project, but without the sidewalks, we were not able to get the funding.
Right. That I remember is that when we didn't get approved, when we decided not to do the sidewalks, we did not get state funding. And so the improvements that we made to Main Street, I think they were done with the Water Enterprise Fund, weren't they, Steve?
Some of it.
Yeah.
It was capital and
the Enterprise Fund.
It was a joint project, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Bob, do you have follow-up questions? Because your hand's still up.
Cobblestones. Yeah, first of all, the cobblestones, can you use them? Because the real cobblestones will be there forever. The fake cobblestones, maybe a couple of years before people totally ignore them and the paint's worn off. But
Can we
The-
use cobblestones? Do you guys want cobblestones? Is that something that we can use?
Well, we can agree that they are a superior product. They held up Boston for centuries. So, yeah, I don't know what DOT would, how we would write that into the contract, but we can try to be clever about that if that's what the select board wants.
Okay.
Or we would just buy them outright. The state would buy them outright. But actually, no, now that, John, I'm thinking, Jonathan, that would probably be a non-participating item then, the cobbles.
I expect that they would be participating.
Oh,
From a design and longevity standpoint, I have no objection to them.
Okay.
Okay, as far as the farm road, I never suggested that for pedestrians. I was holding on to the sidewalks. It was to eliminate the bike paths because, and we've done this, but we've spent about $6,000 so far improving the farm road, trying to get it back into condition, mostly cutting down. That's a heavily forested area on our land, and we've cut down a number of trees because they're threatening, because the children on Blake's Hill, who are the smart ones when it comes to biking along Boston Road, choose to go on the farm road rather than on Boston Road because they can get exactly where they want to go without having to, try, and they won't use a bike lane. If I were a parent down there, no way would I let my kids on that road for a bike lane. The other part, so I don't understand how it got rejected. It was internal. It was just rejected. The second thing, I'm not sure I remember in the September 18th meeting that the selectmen decided not to pursue a combined path, which is what Paul said. I thought, did you guys vote on that and said, no, we don't want that?
Not at the September 18th meeting because we weren't there.
Or whenever it was, I don't know when that happened.
2018.
I think what Paul is referring to is back in 2018. Is that
Yes.
right, Paul?
Yes, yeah.
I think he's referring to back in 2018. And when the plan was presented to us back in 2018 with sidewalks and bike lanes, I think at that time, the select board voiced its concern about having pedestrians and bicyclists using the same path and the same lane. And because of our concern for safety and for the interaction between pedestrians and bicyclists, that we were not in favor of that. But that was back in 2018. That's my memory.
Much better.
Yeah, well, the combat between pedestrians and automobiles is far worse than the one between pedestrians and bicycles. So I do have one final comment.
Okay.
And that is, this does not jive with the master plan at all. We spend money on 2 master plans trying to preserve the rural look and feel of the town. And instead of that, you gave us an urban design for 2 miles of road. And it seems to me it was done because it was approved by MassDOT and you want to take the money. But we didn't get treated like Main Street. Main Street apparently is okay to not do sidewalks and to use town money. Boston Road, no. We are an inferior neighborhood of the center of Westford. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Patrick McGinn, you have your hand up. Is this in addition to some of the comments that you have written in about and that we've read?
Yeah, I was wondering if it's possible to put up the plan, the last plan that Mr. Cronin showed with the colored bike lanes.
There you go.
Yeah, I guess that, I first wanted to thank everyone. I mean, this is just way more than I expected. I can't tell you how grateful I am for all of the effort and for the responsiveness of the board to the comments that were made and to the folks that worked on doing all of this work, because this looks like a lot of work. Thank you so much. I mean, it really makes me feel so much part of this community. And so I really am grateful to all of you for doing all of this. It seems like you're addressing the concerns as best as possible within these rather tight confines. So thank you. You answered my questions about where these would go. And I just wanted to see this picture again, because it seems like, I know that at the beginning, Mr. Stark talked about how these visual cues, like the painting around the medians and then the highlighting of those bike lanes would help to slow people down and it makes total sense after he explained it. So this seems to kind of address those concerns. So I just wanted to thank you all for doing all this, because it seems like that will help to slow it down and make it certainly a much better road and also safer, and maybe make it even a bit slower. My only question was, when the speeds on the road are taken, are there differences? So the average is given, but the road does change quite a bit. And so up at Boston Common or the center versus sort of down where Crown is, are there two different speeds that you're measuring in those areas? And is that, I can see that the placement is certainly recognizing that, but do those speeds differ?
Yeah, Jonathan can explain how we have automatic traffic recordings and how that works. It's complicated.
Yeah, we took speed data at two locations on Boston Road. One was north of Crown, and the other one was further down toward Blake's Hill. And there was a difference in the speeds that were noted of about 5 miles an hour higher on the downspeed section for both the 85th percentile speed and the average or median speed or the mean speed.
And that would have influenced, Mr. Rockwell, how you place these medians?
Correct.
Okay.
However, I mean, one of the focus of one of the considerations in placing the medians was also to place them within the more densely residential developed area as well, to control speeds within that location. But as I mentioned earlier, consideration for locating them in advance of those horizontal curves for a safety perspective, as well as traffic calming goal.
Yeah. I mean, that was great. When I sent it to Paul, my ideas about the medians, I indicated the stations that it seemed to make sense with that exact mindset of, can we help to slow this down before it gets to those those poor folks try to pull out from Crown. But this seems like it really, it's great. So I really appreciate everyone's responsiveness, and I'll let you all go. I know you're busy, but I appreciate this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Since we're talking about medians, I do want to go to a question that we have from Dana Kelly. And she asked, would one of those medians interfere with Mamie Lane and taking a left towards 495? As a homeowner on Mamie Lane, we wouldn't want to be affected taking a left. So,
the median locations were selected to avoid driveway locations, side street locations, including Mamie Lane, so it would not conflict with turning movements in and out of Mamie. That was certainly one of the goals in locating them. We didn't want, even though now they are flush and a vehicle could drive over them, we don't want to encourage vehicles to have to be driving over them on a daily basis to get in and out of driveways and side streets.
Okay, thank you. Peter Pazurski has his hand up.
All right, I'm unmuted, hopefully, and before my headphones die again. So I just want to reiterate, yes, medians wear down, and then my concern becomes, does the road become wider and faster all of a sudden? So if it's not something that's durable, or in 5 years, are these now an extra 4 foot wide roads? Is this 10 feet of bike lane plus 4 feet of middle lane plus 22 feet of lanes, now all of a sudden even worse state than we are now? And I think my point earlier with my earlier question was not what statutory speed or any of these semantical distinctions are. I grew up around here, and if you drove through Dunstable Center and you were going 30 miles an hour, you expected a speeding ticket. I drove through Dunstable Center for 20 years, and you didn't go 40 through Dunstable Center because you knew there was a cop there and you knew you were getting pulled over. Unless you're talking about that, then you're not talking about enforcement. You're not talking about creating an atmosphere where people have an expectation. I don't think I've ever seen anyone pulled over relatively in the last 3 or 4 years in front of my house, or between the Drew property and the top of the hill. So I don't know that we have any expectation that anyone cutting through here has any expectation they will be pulled over. And there really isn't a place for a good speed trap, to be honest, either. So I don't know that I would expect people to expect to be pulled over. But if you're talking about strictly enforced signs, they're meaningless if we don't have a commitment for consistent enforcement. So we can't hem and haw over that. That has to be an expectation if that's the reason that we're supposed to buy into this plan. There has to be an expectation that that's going to be a follow through. I think the chief had mentioned the average of the road was 36, but I sat out there for 5 minutes with their sign and I saw the numbers flashing. If someone comes down the road going 50 and the next person who I saw go down the road was an elderly woman going 30 with 10 cars behind her, yeah, the average of the road is 36 because that's 20 cars averaging out. And that elderly woman's who's getting tailgated and probably at more of a risk for an accident than anyone else on the road, but she's actually going the speed limit. That's more of a concern. I mean, that's not a solution. You can't just grab an average because blocks of traffic affect averages heavily. And I can't speak for anyone else who lives on this road, but I can tell you right now, my kids will never ride in those bike lanes because I don't want them to die. And I think that is generally the assessment of anyone who has kids on this road. These bike lanes are for adults who are hobbyists. They're not for people coming down from the center to go to Cornerstone at their work. There's no right-minded person is letting their 14, 12, 10-year-old ride down this road on a bike lane with people zooming past going 50. And also, is there going to be a commitment to repaint these bike lanes green with white striping every how many years? Because once that painting fades, that's a 5 foot wider road that, as far as a motorist is concerned, just like as the medians wear down, that's a 5 foot wider middle to the road. So what is the commitment? Yearly, twice every other year, 5 years, 10 years? How often do these get repainted to make sure that it's constantly visible? Because these changes will look fine up front, but 5, 10 years from now, this could be a 55-mile-an-hour road de facto.
Okay, thank you. Jody, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I would like to say, Peter, that yes, we are making a commitment to increasing police presence on the road. I disagree with Bob Jeffries. I do think that police presence does make an impact. I drive down Depot every day and I know that they're going to be there, and I drive under the speed limit because of it. So I personally am making a commitment that we are going to have increased patrol on Boston Road. And also, what else was I going to say? Oh, yes, I will also make a commitment that we will keep the paint intact. And yes, we do repaint our crosswalks every 2 years or whatever. We're not going to let the paint fade away. If it works and people like it, we will keep it. So that's my commitment to you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of more comments. There are several comments that very much like the idea of cobblestones. I just relay that to everybody. Yes, please use real cobblestones. I'll help pay for the cobblestones. Cobblestones look good. And then Justin Borick writes, I appreciate the changes and support both the paint, whoa, sorry, my screen was moving. I appreciate the changes and support both the painted bike lane and cobblestone median. Painted bike lanes substantially increase safety. Was the increase in signage include flashing electronic speed signs? These signs take away from the aesthetic of the town center. Was there any exploration into increasing crosswalks or adding cobblestones to the existing crosswalk at the end of Boston Road? So I think really his questions are about, was the increase in signage include flashing electronic speed signs? And then also an exploration into increasing crosswalks or adding cobblestone stones to the existing crosswalk at the end of Boston Road.
Yeah, I can speak briefly to the treatment at Main Street and Boston Road. So the flush median that we had shown there in the last presentation I think we'd envisioned it being something like a cobblestone pattern. And if there's widespread support for true cobblestones, I think we would use that material there for consistency as well. Regarding the crosswalks themselves, I think stamped asphalt was envisioned initially, consistent with or somewhat consistent with the material that's there now. Maybe a slightly improved material over what's there today for those crosswalks within the town center. But the key is that they contrast visually with the pavement. So there's some flexibility in what color or pattern they could be or what material. But from a maintenance standpoint, making the crosswalks a cobble or a true brick can potentially be a maintenance concern because vehicles are driving over those on a constant basis, whereas the medians, vehicles are typically avoiding those.
Okay. Where are we? Bill Harmon wrote, hang on a minute. Bill Harmon writes that the bike lanes make the paved road look wider. Why isn't there a barrier such as a curb or a stone wall separating the bike lanes from the car lanes?
In order to make a separated bike facility, it would increase the overall footprint of the roadway and pedestrian and sidewalk improvements significantly. So the preferred typical section that was advanced to the 25% design was sensitive to the level of impacts associated with what type of bike accommodation we were proposing. A narrow curb can't just be installed between the bike lane, as that would be a hazard. It would need to be a greater separation of a number of feet between the travel lane and a separated raised bike lane.
Jody?
Also, part of our concern is getting public safety vehicles down the road. And if we're putting up some sort of barrier between the road and the bike lane, that is defeating the purpose of trying to get people to pull over so our emergency vehicles can get down the road. So that is another reason.
Okay. Wesley Olson writes, I appreciate the work done on this. My comment is that the real problem is the amount of traffic on Boston Road, not the speed. Even if everyone drives 30 miles per hour, it will still be difficult to cross and dangerous for the kids to ride in the bike lanes. I don't think anything can be done with the road design to reduce the amount of traffic. Dana Kelly asked this question: if increased patrol is in the plan, where would those patrol cars be stationed to enforce the speed limit? I will let the chief answer that, but I suspect he's not going to tell you. But go ahead, Chief Chambers.
We will take every opportunity to find small slices where we can get off to the side of the road and not impact traffic. We also do have the ability to park in people's driveways and use a handheld radar unit as well. So we'll mix it up.
Michael Chisholm writes, wouldn't painted bike lanes be slick in damp weather, thus precarious with rush hour vehicle traffic?
Yeah, there are treatments in conjunction with the coloring that can be installed to increase the coefficient of friction between the surface and the vehicles.
Okay. Peter Pazurski asks again, I would like Paul to answer how they would make changes down the road if they find speeds do increase. He had mentioned adjustments, but I do not see adjustments can be made once this work is done.
Yeah, so that's clearly selective enforcement and in the police department. So we'll be in communication back and forth as we constantly are with public safety when it comes to matters like this. And we would make them aware of what target we were trying to reach one way or another. We won't increase speeds if people do slow down, but we'll let them know if they need to be out there more frequently.
Okay. And the last question we have right now is from Maureen George, who, nope, there's another one. Must we have bike lanes? It seems no one in Westford would use them. And there is sort of a corollary question from Sandeep Inampudi, which asks, is there data on how much bike traffic is expected in Boston Road?
Bicycles were included in the traffic counts that we did back in 2017 and 2018, but we do not have a projection for what a potential increase in bicycle traffic may be once you implement bike lanes.
Do we have any sense right now how often or how frequently we see bicyclists on Boston Road, even if it's just anecdotal?
I don't have the data immediately handy. I think it was on the order of 10 or 12 a day, potentially in that range. Don't quote me on that though.
Okay. One of the neighbors, Peter Pazerski, says rarely. I know I've seen bicyclists, you know, when I've driven down Boston Road on occasion, so. Okay, and Michael Chisholm writes, I would not allow a loved one to use Boston Road bike lanes strictly because of safety concerns. Okay, so, all right, one last question from Bill Harmon, and then I'm going to come back to the board because for any decisions, for a decision that we're going to make tonight. And Bill Harmon writes, consider a speed radar that would send a speeding ticket to the car owner. Ooh, how expensive would that be? How many dollars? Is it even possible?
We did look into that, Madam Chair, and that's not permissible under Commonwealth law right now.
Okay. All right. Let me turn it back to the board now and ask the board what its pleasure is, whether we are in support of the 75% design with the changes that are being recommended tonight. And also, is there a sense that we should also use cobblestones for the median and for the crosswalk, at least at the end of Boston Road, as further traffic calming measures, as well as also for life expectancy and longevity, I think is the best way to put it. So, Scott?
Actually, a question for Paul, I suppose, first. That's a 5-foot sidewalk, correct?
Yes, correct. 5 foot and then 6 inches of the vertical granite curb.
And there's nothing that says you can't ride a bike on a sidewalk, correct?
If you're a minor, the chief can answer this as well, but if you're a minor in Massachusetts, you can ride on the sidewalk. You can be accompanied by an adult if you're a minor riding, if I'm correct, Chief. Yeah, exactly, Paul. The older adult bike riders are going about 30 miles an hour. Yeah, we don't want them on the sidewalk.
Well, that's why I think Peter raises a great point that there's two kinds of bicyclists, right? There are the professional or hobbyists who are going 30 miles per hour who do need and probably would use a bike lane if we had one. Then there are the kids who aren't going to use it. I wouldn't want you to on those bike lanes either, but they can be on the sidewalk. So there is a safe alternative for them in this plan. That strikes me.
That's correct, but we understand the points that the residents are trying to make, and we're not here to debate them. But yeah, they certainly, young people should use the sidewalk with a bicycle.
I think we want real cobblestones. I mean, if you accidentally drive over paint, you go over paint, right? You accidentally go over cobblestones, you've gone over cobblestone. So I think you want actual cobblestones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other comments from the board? Okay. John?
Yeah, I agree with the changes. I think this is a big improvement to the road. And I think with the changes, that'll mitigate against some of the speeds. And if we have to make adjustments with enforcement and signage and maybe even changing the speed limit, we can do that based on our experience.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with both John and Scott. I also agree about using cobblestones.
Yeah.
You know, I do think sort of for future discussion, I'm just throwing this out. You know, Bob Jeffries has raised, and Bill Harmon as well in a comment, has raised the issue of the use of Farm Road for bicyclists. I don't know the property issues involved or the land issues involved with the landowners. But if that's a bike path that at some point in time could be used for the residents, maybe that's something for the pedestrian safety committee to look at and to explore, and you know, come back with to the town or to us as the select board with any proposal. In addition, you know, if Bob wants to, you know, work with us to, you know, let residents know that there's an alternative way to get down Boston Road, i.e. through Farm Road, we can perhaps somehow publicize that and make that known to folks too. So I just think that that's something we should think about in the future, and keep in mind that there may be an alternative way to get down Boston Road for folks besides using Boston Road and using this alternative path. But as I said, I don't know anything about the land issues involved and what would be involved in doing that, but it's certainly, I think, something that we should explore sometime in the future. Okay. There are two final comments that I will, a question and a comment from Bob Jeffries that I will read, and then I think the board is ready to vote one way or the other. So Bill Harmon writes, to make it possible for Westford to have automatic speeding tickets, could Westford use the home rule process? Anybody know the answer to that one? I'm guessing if it's, I don't think we know the answer to your question.
Yeah, I can't speak to the exact legality of that, but I do know that if it was going to have any enforcement teeth with the RMV, it would have to go through the district court for any appeals. So I do not believe that that would be enforceable unless it went through the clerk's office, which I would imagine would be problematic.
I anticipate that if it was possible, Cambridge and Somerville would have done it years and years ago, and they have not. So,
okay. And Bob Jeffries writes, the Boston Road North bike lane can be eliminated because no rider can go 30 miles up Boston Road. Okay. All right. So what's the pleasure of the board? Is there a motion? Is there any further discussion? Tom?
I don't want to curtail any discussion, but I'm ready to make a motion. So I would move to I would move to accept the 75% design with the modifications for traffic calming and speed management discussed tonight, including the use of real cobblestones in medians and at the, is it the Boston, the crosswalk at the top of Boston Road as appropriate. That's it. That's my motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Is there any, yes, Scott, I was going to say, is there any further discussion? So Scott.
Just very quick. I mean, I'm the board's rep to the.
Yep, I know you are.
And I know that that Bill and Don Gala have been looking at getting permissions of people to use their yards for trail networks. So happy to work with Bob and, you know, just to see if we can get this thing working with property permissions to make Farm Road work.
Great. I think that would be terrific. All right. Any other further comments or questions from the board? Not seeing any. We have a motion in a second. So all those in favor, Scott?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Anita?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so I think that Paul, Jonathan, and Steve, you have your marching orders. I want to thank everybody for all of their hard work in putting this together and pulling this together. I also want to thank all of the residents who have contributed to this process and chimed in and given us your thoughts and your suggestions and recommendations. You all may not be completely satisfied, and I think as a board, we certainly appreciate and understand that, but we are trying to do the best that we can, and we'll continue to do so. And as I said, we appreciate all of your feedback and your comments in this project, and think that what you have suggested and contributed has made the project a better one than when we started last week. So thank you all very much. And if there is nothing further, John?
Yeah, it's going to be, what, 3 years before this project gets underway. And I think we ought to make a commitment to continue paying extra attention to Boston Road and improving our enforcement and whatnot as best we can over the next 3 years.
Yes, I think everybody would agree to that. So with that, thank you all very much. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor, just raise your hands. All right. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening. Everyone in Westford, stay safe and be well. And good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.